All right, gang, it's Hexy. We're wrapping up scenario 4 of the wilderness. Heth versus Getty, or Getty attacks Heth, or Heth attacks Getty. Along the Orange Plank Road, okay. Heth or AP Hill, sorry, with 2 divisions. Heth and then Wilcox arrives the turn after, or the second turn, facing off against 4 divisions, whole bunch of brigades, pretty much the entirety of 2nd Corps, and a division from 6th Corps, less 1 brigade, I think. And I think it was Neal's brigade was off somewhere else. So the developers, so Dick Vohlers and Al Smith and the GBACW head honcho, Dick Whitaker, they have informed me that I can talk about the couple of special rules that are added into this. And so that's kind of cool. Some may have already figured it out. Some may already know. But we're going to talk about just 2 specific special rules that have been added in. You can use them as optional. They recommend, and I recommend if you're playing, that you use them because they add a great effect to the game. All right. So you notice my little orange markers on the map. Those, because like I say, this is I printed this myself and just test playing all the miscellaneous counters. I'm sure they will come with the set when it gets released. Those are fires that get started by these troops shooting. This is very dense, dry thickets, and they caught fire pretty easy. Now, over the 4 turns that I've played, I think I had 8 brush fires started. And that becomes like a wall, an impenetrable wall that you can't move into. It blocks line of sight. You can't shoot through it because you can't see nothing on the other side. And any unit that is in one, that starts one, at the end of whatever brigade is activating, at the end of any fire or shock, they've got to withdraw out of those hexes. And let me tell you something, that's like having if you're on the defense, it's like you almost want to start a fire with maybe just strike a match and throw it down there, because if you need something to screen you, that'll do it, because nothing's going through that hex and you're backing out of it away from combat. So, and nobody's going to see you through it. So that's a cool little addition. And many a times it helped the unit that started it. Many a times it stunted the forward momentum of a unit that started it. And as you can see over here, these 2 here kind of slowed down Mott's division, his approach to try to get into fight Heth. And in Heath's defense, all he had to do was back off just a little bit, and Mott was never able to get there. I think his front couple units maybe, or his front 1 or 2 units might have got some fire in. And, of course, one of them got chased off, and the other one took some casualties. But they were never able to close the gap. All right. Second rule, and this one's really cool, is called drift. No, not Grand Theft Auto or something like that where you're drifting in a car. But what happens is these woods were so dense that as units moved through them, you couldn't see very far. So a unit might get disoriented and drift off its line of march. And in a battle line, that probably wasn't too hard to do. So what happens is, under certain circumstances, when a unit moves and there are 2 wooded hexes, not a road, but 2 wooded hexes in their front, and they move, at the end of their movement, and as the rules go right now, at the end of their movement and fire, you have 2 options. You can either do what they call formation drift, which is a brigade, or you can do individual units. And I played with both of them, and they both work very well. It's just doing individual unit drift, you're going to spend more time doing the drift. So what happens is after they finish that, you roll on a chart, which I don't have that in front of me. You roll your 8-sided or your 10-sided dice, and then it'll tell you which way the units drift, or it might say they didn't, they were successful, or they might have to roll for a UDD. And let me tell you what the drift did to poor Barlow. So Barlow was sitting on the road here at the start of this turn. All right, I think their head unit was here and their back unit was all the way down the road here. And I said, I've only got 1 turn left. I need to put them into advanced mode and try to push their way through these woods. Hopefully, maybe get one activation in there where they can shoot and engage. And I know it was enough because I was able to do it with Bernie's division. These brigades drifted every time backwards. I mean, all the way, they kept drifting backwards. They would move forward. So they were in advance mode. I needed to get them up here. They were moving 3 hexes, and if you move 3 hexes through these woods, you got to roll for UDD. Well, there's some that are disrupted, okay? And so now their movement factor is 5. They're only going to end up moving 2 hexes. And then you roll for drift after they do it, and I'm telling you, 4 brigades, every time they rolled, they drifted backwards, except for I think the front brigade here drifted left on the last one. They were never able to close on Wilcox over here and cause some casualties. So, and what a realistic effect. You had to know that had to be a realistic effect in these thickets. If you've ever been down there, you'll know what I'm talking about, because that stuff is dense down there. So the fighting, for the most part, was conducted by the 2 initial divisions of Getty and Heth, and then Bernie and Wilcox, the 2 of them were able to close on the second turn and get into a fight. So what ended up happening here, because of the movement, let's call them the movement disablers of drift in these heavy thickets, you had 2 divisions fighting 2 divisions. Now, Bernie's got 2 brigades, and they're massive. They're huge brigades. So he was already going to have command issues if anybody got, because of range of the commanders. I had a couple of cases where a regiment, because of drift or some reason, got pushed away from the remaining regiments of the brigade. So then your sort of daisy chain for command put them out of command. It also happened to Wilcox. He had the same problem. Heth had an entire brigade go out of command, which actually you can still see it on the last turn here. All right, and you know what's that happens once you're out of command? It stays that way for the whole turn. The Union had brigade over here on the far end. I think it's Eustis. I believe he went out of command. Bernie had one instance of it. So both sides had instances of brigades or regiments being out of command. And, of course, when you're out of command, it reduces your activations by 1. Anybody that becomes combat ineffective, the maximum activations they can have is 2. Yeah, sorry, this video is going to take a little longer than 10 minutes tonight, so not too much longer, I hope. So when it's all said and done, after 4 turns, 4 hours of just nonstop fighting, the Union had 1 brigade that went combat ineffective, and he's sitting over here. And you know what? Now that I think about it, he is not combat ineffective any longer, because he was able to rally 1 unit. So at the end of the turn, he would have got that combat. So actually, now I think there were no combat ineffective units. So then it just became a casualty fight. The developers, the designer and developers, asked me to play this scenario without these breastworks that are in the battle book for this scenario. And the breastworks, I don't know all the details about it, but I know I mentioned it in the first turn, that the terrain was like a washboard here. So the Confederacy, they were able to just find places that just acted like breastworks. Well, in the battle book, there's a line that you put these breastworks down to represent that front line or whatever, them using cover. They asked me to play the game without Heth having those breastwork markers. So it was just a straight up fight in the woods pretty much, and you were just getting the benefit of firing into the woods. And to find out how much pressure Heth could take, or if Heth could even withstand it, or how much assistance Heth would need in this fight. So I did that. And I guess to make a long story shorter, Heth held his ground. All right, he did move back a little bit. So I'm assuming that if I did have the breastwork things in here, because there is a victory condition for that, it looks to me, and I don't know, I have to lay them all out again, but it looks to me like the Union probably would have taken those hexes, which would have been, I think it's 5 victory points or 2 or something like that. But like I said, I did not play with those. I was asked not to see how much Heth could take, how much punishment, or if he could even withstand this, and I think he did a good job. Now, however, I will say this. If this this scenario had 2 more game turns? I don't think so. I think Heth would have been borderline getting ready to collapse over here, and Wilcox still in fine, but there's no way Wilcox was going to be able to handle all of Barlow's division on the map. And then you've got all of Mott over here moving in. I don't think he would have been able to handle all of that. So as it ended, there's no victory points. Nobody got awarded any victory points. So here's the casualty count. So your victory conditions were 1, the breastworks. Casualty, if one side had caused 150% more casualties than the casualties they took, there's victory points for that. And then there were victory points for brigade combat ineffective units. Well, since we took that one off of there for that one Union brigade, okay, there are no combat ineffective units, formations. The breastworks weren't part of it, so it was casualties. And you do not count the routed ones, only the casualties from the routed units. So the Confederates lost 51 casualties, and you multiply that by 50, and you get your count in hundreds or whatever, total count. And the Union lost 58. So we've got nothing on. It's a draw. Nobody has met any of the victory conditions. Okay, so if we want to take that and say, okay, let's toss out what the game victory conditions are, and let's say by casualties here. Well, it's pretty obvious that the Confederates losing, 51 to the Union 58, it would have caused the Confederates a lot more pain because you're in 1864 now and they can't replace those. And so it's almost an even casualty count, and like I say, the Union, Grant he would get those guys replaced, whereas the Confederacy could not. So taking pretty much a 1-to-1 loss, not good for the Confederacy. Now, when you throw in the routed units, it became 68 casualties for the Confederates and 87 for the Union. A little different. Still not anything to attain the victory conditions over. All right, so this is the Wilderness, all right, which you can tell by looking at the map. This is going to be good. I'm telling you, when this thing gets released, it's going to. And like I say, the guys are still working on it. The test. There's groups of test players going on that are playing, and I'm fortunate enough to be one of them. And this one's going to be awesome, and I think it's going to be the first, major wilderness. It's never been done as far as I know. I mean, I think Blue and the Gray had one, but my God, Blue and the Gray from SPI, that was simple I go you go type stuff. Nothing like this. I mean, this is 3-dog in the wilderness here, guys. This is Terrible Swift Sword at an elite rules level and scale in the wilderness. Okay. What is this a test of? This is a test of command because of the density. It's a test of, can you overcome a major amount of confusion with things like drift, all right, with things like fires in your way, with things like being in attack mode and only being able to move 1 hex in attack mode. So units got to be all bunched up against each other, and the first time one of them turns around and runs, now you have a chain effect of everything he runs through because he's going to retreat. And you're not going to violate stacking, so a lot of times they got to retreat through units. I had one instance here where a unit had to retreat through 3 different stacks or 3 different units, and and that's how a lot of these routes up here happened that have no casualties on them. All right, there's 1, 2, 3 of them that had 0. Look at that, a 10 strength unit, an 8 strength unit. All right, they routed under the circumstances of somebody that was chased out of a fight that ran through them, disrupted them all to hell. And you roll, once you have second disorders, you're going to roll on that table over there, and you have a chance they're going to rout, and they did. The Union cohesions they're stronger in this game. They got some really strong cohesive units. Still not the best. The Confederates, I'd say 90% of their units were 7s and 8s. 7s and 8s, and then you got some of Heath's guys are down there at 6, 5, and 4. But that was painful. And then of course you're in there close with stacks, and you're trying to figure out because they got a retreat that was back 2 hexes. So it caused a lot of nightmare. I kind of would have liked to have seen Dick or Al Smith had alerted me to. They have an optional historic scenario, which I think I mentioned it. Or rule, which I think I mentioned it in the 3rd video, of Birney's division was supposed to go to the right of Getty historically in attack, okay? And then I'm assuming that Mott and Barlow all came in on the left. And it makes sense. I can understand why, because Bernie was the first unit up behind Getty. So he was already in this area here, I think, the head of his column. So him going this way could have happened. I had decided just to put him in advance mode right off the bat to get him into the fight because it was only 4 turns as fast as I could. And truthfully, you need to get at least 3 activations, I think, if you're trying to come in advance mode off this road. Now, on the third game turn, I had the issue where the March chit got drawn before Mott drew his second, and he only had 2 chits to draw. And then on the last turn, he only had 2 chits to draw. Bernie only had 1 activation on the last turn, so that just hurt. And Getty, of all the divisions here, of all the formations here, Getty was the one that was getting beaten up the worst. So, all right, so let's call it right there. You've learned about the drift. You've learned about the fires in the woods, which, like I say, have an awesome effect. You're going to learn about the struggle of confusion and keeping your units in line. Keeping their cohesion to get them to move, because they're gonna drift. You're not going to avoid it all the time. You're going to have units that get disrupted, and once you're disrupted, that slows you down even more. Or you have to waste an activation trying to undisrupt units to get them forward. I found myself more often than not, forget it, don't mess with it. Just move them 2 hexes instead of 3. Because if you move them 3, you're rolling for disruption. And now there is no further effect on a roll for if they disrupt from drift or something like that. They just remain disrupted is all it is. I mean, for the movement, or for drifting and for the movement. So, all right, fun. 4 turns of hell pretty much with this one here. Balanced enough. Yeah, I mean, dice rolls are up and down either way. Nothing dramatic for one side. You might get a couple rolls back to back that are real high for one side, but then it would turn around and do the same thing for the other side. Not a ton of shock combat in this, but I've probably had 4 or 5 maybe, because you kind of have to when you get the chance to chase some. You want to, imagine right here, you shock this unit and you chase him off. Look at what he's got to go through to get out. Especially when I think the stacking is 12, I'm not sure, but to get out of here. So yeah, you can create a lot of havoc just by doing that. Enjoyed the hell out of this. There's still some more scenarios to play. I'm going to wait and see what the guys tell me they want me to do next. And let's get this posted so you can see some of the 4 hours of havoc that was created in the wilderness with Heth versus Getty. Talk to y'all soon.